Thanks, guys, for being here. So before I tell you exactly who I am, I want to tell you a story. So you can sit back and relax, maybe even close your eyes if you want to. So I want you to imagine you are sitting at your office, sitting at your desk in the office, and you get a phone call from your boss or your manager or your director, and there's a high-level meeting, project meeting that needs to take place. And all the stakeholders or the project team members must attend. And you can hear the concern in this man or this woman's voice. They are panicking. But you are calm. Because something changed in your life since you attended a lecture at the business school of the University of the Free State. And you say, you'll be there, you make your way to the meeting, and when you get there, you find your colleagues, the other team members, and your boss standing in the foyer. They're waiting for you. And they stare back at you, and you can see they almost look like rabbits trapped in the headlights of a speeding bakkie somewhere on a dust road outside Bultfontein. Now, if you know what that looks like, it means that you are from Bultfontein. Or it means that you've attended a lot of project meetings, one of the two. You guys get into the lift that takes you to the boardroom, and you can feel you are confronted by this anxious silence. Everybody's a bit nervous. And as you walk out and you walk to the boardroom, you get to this point, open the door of the boardroom, expensive air escapes onto the carpet next to you. You walk in, and there sits all the project constituents, the stakeholders, project managers, very, very important people. You guys go and sit down and they ask one question. And they say, what is this project's progress status? And chaos ensues. Everybody's jumping around, fiddling with their papers, thinking how to answer this dreaded question. People are taking out Gantt charts with 40,000 activities on it. And 300 pages A4, giving it to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders stand over this and they're trying to make sense of it. They look like a toddler trying to figure out a 50-piece Winnie the Pooh puzzle. And they can't make sense of this thing at all. And then you, of all people, you put up your hand. And you can see your boss from the corner of your eye. He is panic-stricken, because he sees this bold move that you're making. But it's quite unexpected, so he's not sure what are you going to produce and what are you going to say. And you slide across the table a one-page document, and suddenly there's clarity from the chaos of a minute ago. And the stakeholders can look at the project and they can see, that's the difference between the cost. That's the variance. This is what's going on. We don't have to file through these thousands and thousands of papers or Gantt charts. And you give them another document that looks like this, where they can clearly see what's the status of this project, what was the plan, what is the actual. And all of a sudden, everybody is smiling and they understand what's going on. You are so happy because you can see from the corner of your eye, your boss is already writing out your check for your end-of-year bonus. And suddenly everything makes sense. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Kobus Le Roux, and I am going to tell you a bit more about project scope changes and also the visualization of project monitoring and some of the tips and tricks that you can use and that we use in the industry. And the idea is I'm going to give you a bit of a real life or a real world perspective on a project. So I'm going to do a bit of a case study with you and then take you through some of the ways in which we can visually monitor progress on projects. Now, for me to talk about scope change on the one hand and project visualizations on the other hand is a bit difficult because they are two different topics. But as a good project manager, I'm going to combine them. And in our case study, I'm going to showcase both of them almost simultaneously. Show you some of the ways in which we do reporting, and then I'm going to tie it in with some scope changes as well. All right. Very important is, if I want to talk about those two topics, I have to talk about project control as well. So those of you who are working on the course right now will know. So scope change has got its own knowledge area inside of PMBOK. And then we've got visualization or reporting, which is separate. Project control is where these two topics basically converge. That's where they come together. And that's why we'll start by focusing on project control. It's part of the integration management knowledge area of PMBOK. But just to illustrate the importance of project control for you, I want to ask you, who of you are familiar with the Wade principle of project management? Where's the students? The Wade van Niekerk principle of project management. Haven't they taught? I'll show you. Don't worry. So the Wade principle of project management is very simple. It says that all of us would like to win a gold medal. Do you agree? Or maybe set a world record. Maybe not in the 400 meters, but at something at least. So just like Wade, we asked the question, how did he get to this point where he could set a world record in that 400 meters at the Olympic Games and win gold? Can I tell you his secret? It's very simple. He ran a very fast final 100 meters. You guys remember, those of you saw it. So everybody thought, no, he's going to pull out. He's not going to make it. And all of a sudden, he had this energy. And he was actually running fast. And he did a wonderful last 100 meters. And he broke the record. He won the gold. So how do you run a very fast last 100 meters? Well, it's very simple. You've got to run a very good first 300 meters. And in that first 300 meters, he had to conserve energy, he had to plan his race, he had to think about the way in which he's going to do it. That allowed him to do that final 100. How did he do that? Well, he had 9-hour training day sessions leading up to the games, which is hard work. Also, he had a very hard-working off-season training plan and a diet plan. And then also, he had more than 5 years, maybe 10 years of participation, competitive conditioning, working on a high level. So the Wade principle of project management teaches us that if we want to set a world record there on top, there is some foundation or some structure here below that needs to be in place. Now, the same principle applies in project management. So in project management, we would like to be able to, in terms of scope change, maybe describe, analyze, and approve. So the analysis there is important. How do we analyze a scope change? And then secondly, how do we get great visual reporting, like the two reports that I showed you just in the beginning? So you'd agree that that would be a very good goal for us to reach in terms of project management. So how to get there? Exactly the same as the Wade principle. We need some form of an automized data feed. And I'll show you exactly how we do that. You don't need fancy software for that. This is something that you can do in Excel as well. It's just something that you don't have to go and punch in the data every time you need it. So we need to automate that. Then we need a schedule revision. Our revisions of our schedule must be up to date. All of this will make sense to you in a while. Also, our schedule updates must show the current progress or the current status of our project accurately. Without that, then our goal at the top becomes impossible or very difficult. Also, we need to have accurate resource and cost loading, which I'll show you. Sounds difficult, but it's not. And then lastly, we need an accurate plan, accurate schedule to enable these accurate analysis. Now this basis, this foundation that I've showed you over here, that is known as project control. And that is why we cannot touch on schedule change, scope change, or any visual representation of data if we don't understand this foundation. So many companies will come to me and say, Kobus, please, we need this. We want to push a button and then have beautiful visualizations and understand the true progress of our project. And then I tell them it's very, very possible, but we need this structure. So even in my own life, unfortunately, this is typically what I would also like to achieve. I would like to win a gold medal at the Olympics, just like my clients would like to have these beautiful visualizations. Unfortunately, this is the structure that I have. That's actual footage of me on a Saturday or a Wednesday at home, Wednesday evening. And then unfortunately, this is what we end up with. Also actual footage of me if I would ever attempt the 400 meters at my tender age. All right, so this is typically what I show my clients when I say, guys, you would like to have this ability to push a button. Unfortunately, you've got no project control. You've got no plan versus actual that's accurate. So unfortunately, this is what you're going to end up with. A system that doesn't work, millions and millions spent on consultants, not getting really what you want. And this is quite important. So what is project control? Well, it's that knowledge area in part of integration, part of the integration knowledge area, as you know, that enables the project manager to monitor and control a project's progress. So monitor and control a project's progress. That is the science or the discipline that is known as project control. It stands on two legs. The first is planned, and the other one is actual. So planned and actual performance. So let me quickly do a case study, just to show you the importance of this again before we can really move on. So I want you to consider the following project. It's a 10-month project, total value 10 million. It's split into two components. 9 million is an expensive piece of equipment, whereas 1 million is physical building work. It's going to take a little bit of time. In month 2 of this project, we've already delivered the 9 million piece of equipment. It's been paid for by the client. So let's theoretically now accept that it is cost. It is the cost of the project is now 9 million, and also the other party, the contractor in this instance, received that. It's part of his certificate. It's accepted. What would be the project's progress status in month 2 of this project? 1%. Come, you're in that meeting now. You're in that meeting where they asked project status. So we've got a 1%. Any other takers? 10%, why?
What progress do you want? You want progress on timeline, or do you want progress on your cost?
Give me anything you want. Good question.
And also, is your cost occurred at the beginning of the task or at the end?
Doesn't matter. So let's say at the 2-month marker. That's the status, yeah, irrespective. Yeah. Where's the project management students? You must showcase your knowledge.
Depends on how far you built already. That's 2 months. Regarding the building,
Right?
that's 1 million. 10 months for.
So the building work hasn't started at all. Nothing. Only that piece of equipment that's there in month 2. Right. Can you see why in my story in the beginning everybody was so nervous? It's because it's such a difficult topic. It seems so easy. Yeah? Good? Zero. Okay, I've got a 0%, I've got a 90%. Yes. Say again, is? Why? Yeah. Okay. Good, okay, I agree with you. Okay, so we've got 90%, we've got 0%, 10%, but that we can throw away. That's not true. Thank you for not mentioning 20%. Because 20%, but you shouldn't have mentioned 20%. So 20%, guys, is the time elapsed. But I'm showing this to you because please don't mention it. What does time elapsed tell us? And it's something that we find, especially in our industry, the building industry, quite often. When I sit in a meeting and someone tells me that this project is 20% time elapsed. What does that tell us? Absolutely nothing. It tells us that time ticks away with regularity. Sorry, the word I'm looking for. So it's a constant, it's a straight line. So thank you. Now that we've got a firm grasp of the obvious, can we move on to project's progress? So there will be two instances where time elapsed will be correct. When is that? Right at the beginning when it's 0% and right at the end when it's 100%, 10 months. That's it. So it's like a broken watch. It'll read the time correctly twice in a 24-hour cycle. Does that mean your watch is accurate? Not at all. So please, I was so glad that you guys don't mention time elapsed. It is an indicator when, just at the beginning and right at the end, that's all. In between, it's never going to be an indicator of progress in any way because we're not sure exactly how the spending and whatnot will happen. All right, so the next one I have was 90%, and that's based on a value. All right, so that's correct because we say it's 9 million of the 10 million, that's a 90% progress if we look at it value-based. And then some of you said 0%. That's also correct based on the work hours. It might be 1%. If you say, all right, it took 2 hours to offload the equipment, and we do the calculation. Granted, but let's use 0 now for the example. So how's it possible that we sit in a high-level meeting and we say, this project is 90% complete, it's also 0% complete, and both of those are correct? What's missing? End value, I like that. This is actually the example I used to explain end value. Wow. Very good. So what do we have here? We have actual. You agree? Actual value, actual. We need the plan to make sense of anything. You agree? And I asked the second question there, what if we add what if there's a scope change? Can you see how difficult it will become for us to measure the impact of that scope change if we don't understand the plan versus the actual? It's nice having the actual, but it's worthless if we don't have the plan. And that's the basis of project control and why it is so important. Because remember those two legs. Project control says plan versus actual. So I've got actual, nice, thank you, but we need both. So typically this will now make sense if on the top side there I've got the cost flow or the cash flow forecast, and there you can see in month 2 it jumps from 0 to 9 million. Why? Because we knew in terms of our plan that we are going to have that piece of equipment on site and that we are going to claim that cost. So the plan says 9 million. It means 90% complete, and we are now 90% complete. So are we on time on this project? On progress? In terms of value? Absolutely, yes. That was the plan, that's the actual. Let's say we also had a work-based flow of work hours. In month 2, sorry, it's a bit cut off here at the bottom, but in month 2, 1 is 0, 2 is 0, then it goes up to 10, 25, 45. Then we follow that nice S-curve. So in month 2, we said planned was 0. Actual is 0. So are we on track? 100% on track. So all of a sudden, that confusion of the previous slide is now makes sense. Because we said, okay, this was the plan, this is the actual. Now we can actually make sense of it. All right, so I'm going to do a case study for you guys now and showcase. I'm going to use Microsoft Project as the tool to showcase some of these visual reports to you. And also I'm going to combine it with why project control is so important, this plan. I'm going to show you exactly how to get that plan to a space where it needs to be. And then we're going to do an exercise of scope change as well, plus visual reporting. I'm going to combine it all into this case study for you. You are more than welcome as I proceed, guys. Keep it informal. You can ask me questions. Stop me if you have a question or want to point out something. You're more than welcome. It's really informal. Don't get too comfortable because it's the graveyard session, so you need to stay engaged and ask questions. So the case study that I have is a pipeline of about a kilometer, and it's divided into sections of 200 meters each. There's also a new pump house that needs to be installed, and then there's going to be a connection to an existing reservoir or whatever. And that's how simple the project is. So what I did is a first step, and those of you who are now going to use Microsoft Project, this will be your first step as well, is to go and do a sensible works breakdown structure of this project. So just that you can understand what I did there is I've added my milestone dates there at the top. Can you see? Got a start date and a completion date. This was in 2017. And then I've got my pipe sections divided into those 200-meter sections. Why do you think I did that? Why not just keep it 1 kilometer? What? Manageable. I like that. Yes. So the reason we do that is to make it manageable. I like that. And also, it gives us more control. So the moment I have a one-liner, the moment we say, there's my project, and that's the duration of it, and I've got a one-liner, one activity. What happens if there's a delay? Can you see it becomes difficult for me to see exactly where did that delay impact? What happened? And secondly, what if I say the progress is now 20%? What is really complete? What section of pipeline is complete? It's difficult to say. Okay, guys, so there's always this advantage of doing, if you do things in this one-liner way, what's the advantage? Well, laziness. You've got more time to spend in front of the TV because it's quick. So that is the advantage. And sometimes we do tend to keep things simple and easy. It doesn't take that amount of time. Depends on what level of detail a client would like to go. But just remember, the more detail you have and the way that I've broken it down, the more control. Because now, all of a sudden, if something happens on that first section of pipe, I can quickly go and identify that exact point. It gives me more control. And especially when we start looking at scope changes and visualizations as well. So secondly, just to show you under each of those headings, those are the activities. So we're going to excavate for the pipe trench. Then we're going to bed, just put a sand bed. Then we're going to lay the pipes on that bed. We're going to test them before we backfill. And then we're going to do a backfill and compact. Very simple exercise. Even those of you who are not in the construction industry will quickly understand what this is all about. And then very importantly, I had to build in resources, which always sounds like this very difficult exercise. And it's really not. It's a simple exercise of thinking, what am I going to need on each of these activities? So for that first one, I've got what is known as a backhoe loader. That's a piece of equipment that you all know. It's always that slow tractor that drives in front of you with the backhoe, that bucket at the back. So that's also known as a TLB. And then I've got my general laborers, 2 of them, and I've got an operator for the TLB. Simple as that. Those are the 3 items I'm going to use to execute the excavation. For the bedding, the same. For laying of the pipe, I've got my pipe material as a resource. Again, operator, backhoe loader, and my laborers. Not a difficult exercise at all. Yes?
The first task is that a task that runs throughout the whole project that covers your overheads?
Yes. So I've got an overhead costing activity, and it's devoid, yeah. So it's simply to cover the time-related cost of me staying on this site. All right.
Also another question, material as part of resources?
Yes. So in projects, I'll just specify that as a material, and then it'll ask me for the quantity. That typically will not carry hours. That's important to stipulate it like that. I know many people forget to, but then it carries work hours. And there's no work hours, in a pipe. The work hours comes from either the equipment or the labor. Okay, so not too difficult. Something that I think anybody that understands project can do. Even if you don't, even if you use Excel, you can do this as well. I think the point that I want to make and what I want to emphasize is that this is part of that weight principle now that I'm building up. Just showing you, because I'm going to show you some perhaps mind-blowing reports in MS Project, none of which are possible or is possible if we don't have this as a basis or as a foundation. So the foundation is not that difficult. It's just a good schedule, logic that's built in, and I've got it resource loaded, and then my resources has got costs. It's also not difficult. What does a laborer cost you per hour? What does the TLB cost you per hour? What is the pipe cost you per meter? It's not things that you should not have. It's very easy to bring them in. All right, so from that, I can all of a sudden open up a report like this that I set up in Microsoft Project as well. But as I stated, you don't need fancy software to do this. You can then easily extract this from your schedule, even in Excel or whatever you use, to get what is the planned cost. I've got a bit of a cash flow forecast there just to show me what's my baseline cost going to be in each month. And that's all now based on the resources that I've added to those activities. So let's run through a few examples now after I've done this. So we've got project control, which is based on those 2 legs, the plan and the actual. And then we're going to look at some scope changes and the way in which I'm going to do visual reports. And I want to show you how this portion basically unlocks everything that I'm going to do on this side. Why is it important for me to understand the difference between planned and actual? So again, progress monitoring.
You always want to compare what you originally planned because it's a plan.
Yes.
It will never be 100% correct against what actually happened.
Why? Variance. Okay, great. Keyword. So if we have variance, then we can start to see a few things, and it opens up possibilities for us. So the first one that I want to show you is it enables us to analyze any scope change very simply. So let me show you an example in project. So let's assume that in that project that I've shown you, there's an added 200 meters of pipe. It was never there before. So it's an addition. And what would we like to do now? What is part of the scope management knowledge areas? We want to define scope changes. We want to analyze them. And then obviously want to approve them. So analysis of scope changes must be the simplest thing that you do on a project. If it's not, if it becomes a muddle and it's very difficult, then you know that your project control is not in place and does not allow you to do it very easily. So I'm going to show you how easy it should be if you've got everything in place. So what I've done here in MS Project is I've just added, you can see my original schedule over here. And then what I did is I simply added there that change request. I've highlighted in a slightly different color. So it's just another 200 meters of pipe. You can see it does not form part of my baseline. Can you see? So the gray bars there at the bottom is the baseline that I've captured to show what was my plan. Now I've got the actual, which is something different. And I've just added my logic there so that I can make sense of it. And immediately, by having a system of project control, I can immediately tell you what's the time impact of that. Would you be able to make sense of this if you have to go through all the lines and 300 pages of A4s? Obviously not. So project controls enables me to go, just have a look at my completion date there, and I look at my float or my total float, total slack, and you'll see it's -8. So immediately I know that the impact of that scope change, the extra 200 meters, if I've added, my assumptions are correct, it's 8 days that this project will be delayed. As simple as that. And because I've got my visual reports set up, I can go to my reporting side, and if I look at the cost impact, I can quickly isolate the cost variance over there. So this addition is going to cost me 212,000 extra. And I can also go and check the exact resources and the exact activities that has now caused this variance. Now the exact activities are that group of activities, which is the extra 200 meters. And then I can go and see my resources over here, plus my overheads as well. That's been impacted. And just scroll down a bit more. And that's what we want. Can you see again a one-page document that you can set up if you understand the fundamentals, which is why it's so important for me to focus on project control, because that's the fundamentals that opens up this ability for us. To quickly have a look at this, and you can see the variance of the impact, you can see the time delay, and if you want to look deeper, you can, but those two markers are actually the most important ones. Yes?
Sorry for all the questions. I see in your actual plan you use total slack. Is there a reason why you use slack instead of the variance itself as a column?
Good question. So sometimes the variance, the finish variance, might give me an indication, but in this instance, it won't, because I don't have a baseline on those specific activities. So it's not going to give me that finish variance that it's going to work out. But also,
Added cost, it's not just a change to current.
yes. But even if I did baseline it, it's difficult, because sometimes I'm going to get a finished variance on activities that does have some slack or some float. And therefore, the finished variance might be 10 days, but it doesn't impact my end date at all. So that's why I need to just check that slack to say, did it impact on my end date in any manner? Okay? The next one I want to show you is the ability that we have to assess trends and to analyze trends. So let's say the scenario is we find that our excavation activity on that first chainage is not going to take 8 days. It's going to take 10 days, for instance. By having the ability of a planned versus actual platform, let me just open it up. I can again go and see what will be So let's say that first section takes 10 days instead of the 8. Having this ability to now check the variance allows me to see what? A bit of a trend. You agree? Because I've got many more excavation activities. So by analyzing this first variance, I can go and ask the question, why did this happen? Why is it 10 days? And the answer is working too slow on site, or my original plan I wasn't thinking, I was laying in front of the TV. It might be environmental factors. And if I know that this impact will be there on all my other activities, again, I can quickly go and check. Because I can check my plan versus actual, I can quickly add them in. And I can start to see a trend and say, if this will continue, can you again see what will be the impact there? Minus 10 days. And let's look at cost. $32,000 difference. Right, and contractors wonder why they don't make money. Just that 2 days on the excavation activity in the first sequence, if I didn't have a system like this, can you see that I couldn't pick up that trend? I couldn't get a flag, and I couldn't assess the variance. And that is the essence of project control, is to say, I've assessed the variance, now I've monitored it, now I need to control it. So what do I do in this instance? I pick up the phone and I phone the boss. And I tell him, you're going to be minus 32,000. Or make a plan, as we usually do. So at least now, again, because we have this basis, we can go back and say, all right, I've monitored it. It tells me that if this trend continues, we're not going to make money. 32,000 is a lot, especially on a 1.7 million project, which isn't a large scope project in this type of industry. So that takes away a lot of our margin. So we can now obviously go back and ask the question, what can we do? Can we perhaps not bring on another TLB or another team? What will be the cost of bringing on that team? And then we can start exercising control. Can you see? We've got options. The problem is if we don't have this, we don't even know that we're not making money because we've got no system of checking variance. All right. Then also, we said that this allows us to assess the trends, analyze any scope changes, and then analyze the contractual or performance risk. So let's say there are 2 delays that took place on this project. One was the client who could not obtain a permit for that first section of laying the pipe, which those of you who are in this industry will know is quite common to happen. So you think you're going to start on site and there's no permit for you to start excavations on that first section. And then secondly, you are delayed in terms of your second excavation because your foreman had a site party and they drank too much and they lost 2 days. Right, and those of you who are laughing are also in the construction industry because you know that happens as well. So let's look at how that scenario will play out. So that scenario that I just told you about will typically look like this if we look at the schedule. You can see that first excavation, it moved slightly off of the baseline. So there's my baseline in gray. There you can see I'm finishing a bit later. And this will typically be a finish variance that I can pick up. And that was on the critical path, so that will impact my end date. Then secondly, can you see there as well? There's a movement, but now it becomes a bit more difficult because that delay would have already impacted this activity as well. So there is also a duration variance because that is now 10 days instead of the 8 days that it should have been. So again, by having that plan, having project control in place, I can create a report, a visual report that can assist me. And once I do the update, just by looking at those variances, I build them into a formula. We can actually go and check something like this, which is a risk apportionment visualization. So you saw there, I just pressed a button. And now I can see that my project completion date is delayed by 5 days. Got a -5 slack. I can see that that first 3 days, that is a client risk. They didn't have a permit in place and we started 3 days late on that activity. And secondly, is a contractor's risk, slow production. Wimsaki was drunk on site, so he cost us a further 2 days. And just by setting up this visual report, using project control as a basis, I can quickly get a report like this. And can you see? No chaos, clarity. We can immediately see what's going on. Imagine what this will mean for your client. To know exactly where the risks are, who's at fault here, and if there is a claim for an extension of time, we can just pull out our documents and see why and where did it happen. And the last one that I want to show you is the fact that once we have the system in place, we can actually see the future. And the example I want to show you is one where, let's say we've got a scenario. Sorry, let me just open it up. Let's say we have a scenario where we've got a key date over there in which our pipeline must be finished. So everything, all the changes must be finished. The pump house or whatever can still carry on. But that section must be complete. If not, I've got a penalty attached to that, as you can see, 5,000 Rand a day if we are late on that key date milestone. Secondly, what happened is we have allowed for 3 TLBs initially. That's what we needed if we look at our resources. At this stage, we only have 2. So those of you not familiar with MS, that 200% just signifies 2 units. So now it gives us a red message there to say this resource is over allocated. So we actually need more than the 2 in order for us to complete. So if I use my visual reporting again, I can go and have a look. And I'm going to do a filter here. For everything that uses that resource. And then I'm going to open up a graph. And then I'm going to ask my software nicely to show me the TLB. And I'm just going to extend my calendar a bit to a daily calendar. There you go. So there you can see what it now does is it measures for me the activities that uses the TLB. And here at the bottom, it gives me a histogram. It says, okay, I'm going to use 2 TLBs. There you can see why. So I'm going to backfill there, excavate there. Both of those activities are using the TLB on that day. Next day, the same thing. So I'm just going to scroll on up to that point where I find the over-allocation. There we go. So on that date, I'm going to need 3 TLBs. And if I look at Y, you'll see there must be 3 activities there that overlaps. And sorry, my calendar is a bit out of sync here. There we go. So there I can quickly identify where those items are. And this is typically where we'll do a resource leveling exercise to say, can we move some of these activities, can we move them around, use some of the float in order to better our project, or to just level that resource so that we can only use 2. And if I do that leveling exercise, the only way for me to do this under the current conditions is I'm going to knock that end date. By 7 days. So in other words, there was no activities with float enough for me to shift them around, not to cause an extension of my milestone. So what would be my options now, would you say? So I've done this, and to say, okay, I'm going to get 2 TLBs, I'm going to force it now. So if I go back to that graph that I've just shown you, you'll see now everything is 2. It's not over allocated anymore. Let's have a look. If we look at the resource graph and I go to my TLB, so let me just click on that activity, and then there you go. TLB right through, no red. Everything is now 2. So I've spread my activities in such a way that I'm only going to use 2. But the consequence is that I've knocked that end date. So what would be my next step? Phone. Who? Phone a friend. The guy in POF Adder who now needs to supply me with another TLB. And he says he can't. So who do I phone next? The project sponsor. Not yet. Your boss first and then the project sponsor. Okay, depends. So you phone somebody, might be the project sponsor, and tell them, look, you've got 2 options. Either we are going to extend this project by 7 days, or what happens if I forget my wife's birthday? I throw money at the problem. This is what you have to do here. Crashing your schedule. You have to bring in more resources. Throw money at the problem, bring more TLBs in, and then you'll be able to keep, because then you'll have 3 TLBs. Okay, and for us again, this whole decision making can be set up beforehand if we understand the fundamentals of planning versus actual. And I have a visual report for that, like always, which now I can quickly send to the project sponsor or my manager and tell him those are your options. Unfortunately, we need 3 TLBs. That's the way we planned this project. That's the way the logic tells us it's going to work. Plus, it's allowed for in our cost. I could only get 2 TLBs for some reason. In POF Adder, everybody's doing solar, so everybody's using the other TLBs. That penalty for the delay, I can go and work out, so I can build in formulas in MS Project to work that out for me. And it tells me that 7-day loss will cost me 35,000. What would it cost me to get another TLB? Just the establishment cost. I don't have to allow for the hours because that was already allowed in my initial. I needed 3 in any case. So if the establishment of getting another TLB there is only going to be 15,000, then at least I've got this option. Can you see? So I can ask somebody to choose between a rock and a hard place and say it's either 35 or 15. But again, can you see that without project control, we don't even have the option or the ability to make this choice. We don't have the ability to analyze that variance. All right, so those are 4 of the items that I've shown you. There are many more. But typically, whenever we look at achieving that, that would be our basis. And this will be the advantages and some of the things that we can easily access if we have that basis of project control intact. As I said, I can show you many more. But again, you guys have to go and study first and do your MS projects. I don't want to disrupt your mind too much. So I'm only going to show you those examples, and you are welcome to ask any questions from this point onwards. Thank you very much. Not difficult questions, though.
So I'm sure there must be plenty now.
This is a bit of a loaded question. I don't know if you, because your industry is quite a bit different than ours. Do you ever, or have you ever worked on a project where the project members actually had an operational job as well? So they sort of working on the project, but they also have an operational job at the same time. And how did you manage those resources? Because it's a bit of a challenge to have somebody that has an operational job that takes priority actually, and then the project takes second place.
Good question. So yeah, I think it happens a lot. Typically, some of our clients has got that, have that problem where they need to allocate resources, but specifically, those are not always just project resources specifically. So these guys have got a bit of a dual role. To manage it is a difficult question. Because it'll probably depend on that company and the way in which they do things. Again, some of the software packages, such as MS Project, and the reason I also used it is because it is so readily available to anybody. It's not really what we call a high-level project management package, although it's very capable and powerful. But typically, you'll be able to use that. And then wherever this person is engaged operationally, they can put that into a calendar specifically on that resource, and then you can also have the project and do your scheduling, and then it'll show you where this guy will not be able to work due to his other commitments. So you might try and manage it in that way, but I know that's also, it sounds good in theory, but it's a difficult one in practice because you won't always have the ability to nail down his scope on the operational side and also not on the project side because it changes quite often. But it is a risk, absolutely, yeah. Typically.
In the IT environment.
That's our problem. I mean, if the server falls over by us, if you're going to have to pick between getting the service back up and running and working on your project, you're going to pick the service first. True. So that's the problem we have.
Yeah, and I must say that is a problem. Even in our industry, we have sometimes Transnet. And these guys have got shut periods where they, or even Sasol, where they do a week of shutting down operations, and then everybody needs to focus on whatever tasks, repairing rails and doing a few OHD repairs and whatnot. So it is difficult. I think probably to have something in place where you can fix it would be to either designate project team members, which you can't in your environment always, or then get in external parties for specific periods to say, come and manage this for us while we take care of the operations that's ongoing. But it is it's a difficult one.
I think the value once again lies in if you schedule those resources, say with the 20% allocation towards the project, at least you have a plan. And when change occurs, you can adjust and accommodate, and you can see what the impact moving forward might be.
Very
and
true,
that's once again the value.
So at least
you have a baseline.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got another, like you said, loaded question. Project, define start and end date, 4 phases within the project.
Okay.
Phase 1, start and end date, tasks in between. No set dates. All the actions, all the activities are consultations that do not happen in sequence. How do you manage that?
Sure. In Outlook, activity list in Word.
Reporting on that.
Yeah.
Managing to controlling and reporting on that. How? Any ideas? Because I'm caught up in a situation like that currently.
That is very difficult. So we have to also appreciate that these software packages in terms of managing schedule comes into play where you have intricate logic relationships between those activities. Where that is not the case, we joke now, but then sometimes it is best to just add them into a list. We always say that's the difference between a linked schedule and just a list. And sometimes we find people trying to do a very high-level project, just listing activities in MS Project without linking them. And then we say, hey, you're wasting the resources of this program. You can just use a Word or an Excel file for that. So that's typically one thing to ask the question, and it's difficult for me to answer if I don't know the intricacies of that project. But there are projects where we have to tell each other, this software will not really work in terms of scheduling that for you. For me, those key dates are very important. That's the basis of where even when I schedule, that's where I start. So that's the first items that I put in. Key dates, when should it be finished? If you then have a list, it's okay, because then you can link them at least to that end date. And as you start, you can start with your actuals. Do a bit of an estimation of when you're going to do them, and then at least keep track of the actuals until you can see that they knock the end date. That'll probably be the best, but it is, again, a difficult one which would need intricate knowledge of that specific project to perhaps give you a better answer.
Kobus, just a short one, maybe just more technical. Have you ever, in your experience, used the projects more in depth into sheeting with that on your resource, or not really in your
What do you
profession?
mean by time sheets?
By using the time sheeting ability of it, yeah. Your experience regarding that, or haven't you touched on?
We
really
have,
this?
yes.
Okay.
If I understand it correctly, where you set the specific times of a resource.
He books his time against the
He books it
project,
against
yeah,
that
and
as
the
actions.
reporting in the background automated to you, and you approve work done.
I haven't used it. I've never used it in that way. So the only way we use it is to set up those planned times, but then the booking actually goes to the percentage update. But we'll never, so we very seldom work with specific resources, whereas within IT and engineering and your professional disciplines, that's typically what you'll do more. And that's my experience are not enough in that area to tell you that I have used it before.
Come, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions? So, Kobus, from my side, you also do forensic work where things go wrong. Do you have maybe a horror story of where you had to go back, you had to recreate the scenario of a project, you had to recreate the baseline with the evidence at hand and illustrate where things go wrong? The value of using a tool like this for that purpose?
Sure, Dion, yeah, almost always. It is very difficult because when we look at forensic delay analysis, there are a few techniques that you can use. And those techniques will provide you with different answers. I think that's the difficulty. So it becomes really complex because we need to delve into the technical side of a schedule. Another problem there is that we have got no standards in terms of planning. So quantity surveyors, for instance, they've got the standard system of measurement. And I know a few other disciplines as well. They've got standards where they say, if this is the way we do it, these are the assumptions that are part of it, no matter what. In planning, we don't have that. So sometimes you get onto site, and there is a delay, or there was a delay, the parties are fighting. I mean, these amounts go up to 50 million. We've seen claims of 700 million just on delays and penalties paid on very large projects. So it becomes a problem now, because once you start looking at the schedule, you find that these guys did not adhere to good practice. So there are good practice guides, but it's not a standard, and they're not obligated to use it. I think that's almost why I say everything becomes a bit of a horror story, because now, firstly, you need to understand and get this schedule back to something that you can work with, and start to go from there. And sometimes you find that this is not going to be the best way for this client to prove their delay. And we have to use other contemporaneous documentation, rebuild the thing from scratch. So in very few instances do we say, okay, yes, we can use that schedule, unless it was done professionally, then it makes it a bit easier. But usually it is a problem and a bit of a mission.
Maybe another question that might not be applicable to you, but let's say, for instance, you are allocated to multiple projects. How do you prioritize? Do you have some sort of prioritization tool?
Again, I think that'll be an internal strategic company.
Use or could recommend to look at?
No, so always we'll touch on, and especially if that is, and we had cases like that, but then we'll ask the company to say, what are your strategic objectives, and where does these projects fit into that? And that'll typically be the way in which we then prioritize. So we need that top level strategy, and then also sometimes that's missing. That's when people realize, oh, we don't actually have a top level strategy, so that's why we have got all these 100 projects, but we don't know which one needs priority.
Do you tend to use a bit of padding on your projects, buffering on times, on costs?
Good
when
question.
you do the actual planning?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you while the camera is running. No, so good question. If I understand you correctly, you mean, so typically buffering is when this activity is going to take, let's say, 20 days, and then the next one as well. But then what I do is I extend them slightly, let's say to 25 days, 25 days, 25 days, and they still fit in because let's say that was my end date. Now I did my schedule initially, and I realized, oh, I'm actually, if I do everything accurately, I still have a bit of float left between the end date and wherever I got to. So the problem in our industry is that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because the moment that I start extending these items, then the start date of that next activity obviously is impacted as well, and then that one as well. And what happens now is the professionals working on our project says they can use this schedule to determine when are they supposed to give you information. So let's say this is a slab that you want to cast in concrete. There needs to be a bending schedule for the steel that needs to be issued. You need to order that steel. So now you're actually, shooting yourself in the foot slightly with that buffer, because all of a sudden these guys say, but no, you are asking me for this stuff way too early. On your schedule it's only another month or whatever. So what I do tend to do is I put in a time risk allowance. Well, that's a dark art. You can't share my secrets. So what I'll do is right at the end, I'll put in an activity and call that a time risk allowance. Then I'll typically state for contract purposes that belongs to me or to the contractor. So if there are delays, the employer are not able to use that. And we'll typically just say it's part of our rates in the bill as well. Put that in. Yeah, so I almost do a buffer, but I show the buffer. And then if I am delayed and I push the end date, and then typically the project manager will ask you, show us how you're going to get back on track. And then it's very simple. I say, no, I'm just going to use time risk. I'm going to pull back 5 days. I still have time risk. So it helps for that as well.
Sorry. With regards to the good practice guides on planning, which documents does the industry usually refer to?
PMI. So PMI has got a good practice guide or schedule, which I've seen, which is very good. Then CIOB. CIOB brought out, that's a Chartered Institute of Building. They've got a guide to good practice in scheduling. I think that's what they call it. And then the other one is the Society of Construction Law, SCL, the SCL protocol. So all three of those documents, so that both CIOB and the other one, British, well, PMI, European, or as well, not necessarily based on an African, context. So I've looked at all three. We've almost created a standard that's separate from those three that adds a bit to our own context. Use some of the best items from each one, but they are not. Yeah, even in European countries, they're not widely used or accepted. Usually, they're used as a stick to beat the opposition with. Once things goes to dispute, then everybody wants to use the SEL protocol. But you have to include it as part of your tender and say, we are going to use this standard, so all planning that's going to be done needs to fall inside of this scope.
Any other questions? Gone? Kobus, thank you so much. I think this was an excellent illustration of firstly applying sound project management principles, and then secondly using technology to make your life easier. Two things stood out for me. Firstly, is if you don't understand project management theory, don't put your hands on the software, because it will produce results that you don't have a clue of where it comes from and how it was generated. And the second thing is, I hope you all took note of the Wade principle. You have to, once you've mastered the theory, you have to master the software as well. And it'll take time and it takes practice, and you'll make errors and you'll learn. But the more and more you engage with it, the more and more you will learn how to get the best out of it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it as well. I've also done MS Project software courses, and I can draw up some nice Gantt charts for you, can load resources and everything, but I've never managed a project with it. And that's a totally different ball game when it comes to controlling and reporting and that side. You have to use it. All right, so Kobus, thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
This was very insightful, and thank you for giving us some of your time.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.